Maria Fabrizio is an illustrator and designer who believes that smart ideas make beautiful work. With an affection for process, she works by hand and on screen for projects large and small while trying to maintain her daily illustration blog, Wordless News. Maria is based in the hot metropolis of, you guessed it, Columbia, South Carolina, where she lives with her husband, her son, and daughter, and a very chubby kitty and a new dog. Maria brings more than 10 years of professional experience and to her practice. She has a BFA from our program here at the SVAD, the design program. So Stephanie and Marius actually worked with Maria when she was an undergraduate student here in the design program. I'm sure they have things to say about that. And oddly enough, Maria was, if I can specially say, Maria was my studio mate. I was very fortunate to be able to work with her in grad school. So we both went through the MFA program at Virginia Commonwealth University. Maria's client list includes NPR and Oprah Magazine, WebMD Magazine, the University of South Carolina as well, Vox, and so many more. So without further ado, I'm going to stop my share and introduce Maria Fabrizio. Maria, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I know you're all probably Zoom fatigued, so hopefully this will be fun and casual and not boring, but we'll see. Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be talking to you guys tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can you guys see that? Hold on. I hate Zoom. Okay. Let's see.
Just don't do the Command L thing. Just make it really big on your screen and don't do the Command L thing.
Big, but then you guys will see all the pages. Can you see it?
Yeah, we can see that.
Oh, good. Okay. So yeah, I'm Maria Fabrizio, and Meena and I met up a couple weeks ago. She lives like, I don't know, what, 6 blocks from me maybe? And we met outside and talked about this meetup. And she said you guys would probably be interested in knowing about the business side of freelancing and illustration. So that's what I tried to focus on tonight. And I am an open book. You guys can ask me anything you want. I'm like not intimidating. So just, yeah, throw your questions at me whenever. So I'm currently an illustrator, a designer, a mom, and I'm super tired. I completely left my husband out of this presentation for some reason, I realized earlier, but he's wonderful and supportive. But yeah, between working and 2 small children plus the pandemic, you can see me frazzled and drinking on the right. I am previously, what's happening? Sorry. I am previously, I went to USC for my BFA and I went to VCU for graduate school. And I've been graduated from graduate school for 10 years now, which makes me feel really old. But I studied graphic design in my undergrad and then visual communications in graduate school, and started freelancing maybe 8 years ago, and just that's what I've been doing. So for my 9 to 5, I use a MacBook Pro and a display. I have a Wacom tablet, iPad Pro, Adobe software, Fresco, tactile materials, and a scanner. I don't have any, I don't really have anything else that I use. I'm pretty tethered to my computer. And some of the things that I've learned doing illustration freelance that I tried really hard to figure out over time was how to work really quickly, because it allows you to make more work and have more clients. And I learned to never bill hourly. because it penalizes you for being efficient. I always try to make time to experiment, usually on Fridays. That's usually my slow day. It's good to be gracious to the art directors that you work with. It's really important to meet deadlines, especially when you're first learning to work with someone and you haven't worked with them before. And then staying in touch is really important too. When I first started freelancing, I felt like every art director was like just so knowledgeable and unapproachable. And I was like, I don't know, just afraid to interact with them in any sort of human way. And I've realized over time, it's actually better to just treat them like a colleague and be respectful, but you can also email people and say like, how's your cat? And they appreciate it. So I wanted to go through some of my work and talk to you guys about the timeline and the pricing and the size and just how the project workflow is. So if you have questions, you can just write them down and ask later or however you want to do it. But I wanted to be really transparent about the price of things and how that works or how I've experienced it for myself. So this was the first thing I did for Oprah Magazine a couple years ago, and they emailed me and said, here's the assignment, here's the size, we need it in 3 weeks, and here's the budget. And I think for bigger clients like Oprah, NPR, some print magazines, they already have their budget, and I don't usually push back on it. I think their rates are pretty standard. So, and 3 weeks to me feels like a very long time. So I went for it. And these were the sketches that I sent to the art director. So I usually only send black and white sketches for the first round. And I usually send lots of little notes with them so that they can see where I'm going. If the sketch is pretty rough, I'll say it might be, you know, this type of figure. It might be this color palette, but I just send black and white sketches and they're really simple. And then there's usually one more round of edits with color, and then there's like a final. And it's interesting to see which art directors are want to give a lot of feedback or want to give you a lot of wiggle room. And it's also very different with print and web. So a lot of my work is just web. And when something's going to print for a magazine, you don't always know exactly what the paper is or how your saturation is going to show up. You know, is it going to be as bright as it is on screen? And sometimes the art director will give you feedback, and sometimes you send it and then you're like, oh, I wish I had tweaked that a little bit. So a 4th-page illustration for Oprah Magazine was $400. Yeah, I'm just listing that out for you guys. I've also done 2 full sections of a magazine for Oprah. They both had longer lead times, which for me is not wonderful for my process. I like a shorter time frame. I don't like to overthink something, and I want to be really, I don't know, a shorter time span just gives me, the pressure gives me a better idea about the concept. But for this one, I had 8 weeks, which was a long time. We went back and forth a few times on the content. So I had a one sketch or a full image that I did that got cut from the magazine because they didn't run the article. And that happens too, and they still paid me. So that's a good thing to know. Sometimes people have a kill fee, and mine's 50%, but if you do the full image and they don't use it, you just, they still pay you. So if you can see, I don't know if you guys can see me, but on screen, that's what it looks like. And then in the magazine, I know you can't see that really well, but there's a big difference in the color. And then the layout, sometimes they'll send you what it'll look like, but sometimes they don't. So like she's kind of scrunched there in the middle. But it's really fun to work in both print and web. And I really enjoyed working with Oprah the times I've worked with them. And the price for that one was $2,500, and that's just what they had priced it at. And again, they paid me for the illustration that didn't show up in print. This was another set of illustrations I did for Oprah, very similar to the other one in terms of price, but it was more. And I think there was another piece that they cut from the issue as well. So because it's going to print and they have like an editorial board that's figuring things out, I think they just pick the stuff, go with an Illustrator, and then if it gets cut, it gets cut. And this one was pretty simple. There wasn't a lot of back and forth on this one like there was the other two. I think it was a different art director. So the illustration on the left is for Resources magazine. I had 3 weeks to work on that one. It was like a vertical half page, and they were $350. That was their budget. They are really into the environment. That's their main topic, science and the environment. And they were great to work with. And that piece was about the Nobel Peace Prize going to a woman. And then the image on the right is for USC, their research magazine. And I had a really long time to work on that. And they didn't have a set budget whenever I worked with them. I worked with them for a couple of years. So it would just depend on how much time we had, how many changes we had. And yeah, it just kind of varied from issue to issue. So it's funny because sometimes the bigger clients have a set budget and the pay is smaller, and a smaller client will have more wiggle room, and you can kind of, I don't know, go back and forth a little bit on the price more. The image on the left was for the University of Richmond. They have an Alumni Magazine that comes out, and they have a section that their president writes every month. And so I've been doing that section for a while. I had a really long lead time on that, 4 weeks, and it's a half page, and they always have $600. So it's really nice to have a situation where you can talk to an art director and know that you've got this one piece coming every, quarter or whatever, and budget for it, the time and the money. And it's just good to have that stability. And one thing I'll say about all of the companies that I've worked with, especially in the last 2 years, they all have a different back end system that you put all of your tax information into. And I mean, it is a monster to manage. Just if you want to get paid, submitting your invoice, making sure everything's in there, reminding someone, and then either doing your direct deposit or a check. So that's a whole nother piece of business, but it's a lot to manage. The image on the right was for Rhode Island Monthly. I did a couple years ago. That one was also 4 weeks. It was a half page, and their budget was $350. And I really like the art director I work with there. And so, it's not the same pay wise, but I like talking to her. I like working with her, so it's worth it. I do a lot of work for Stat News. They've been really busy this year with the pandemic. So I've been doing something with them almost every other week. But they usually have a week turnaround, and they only do web. So that's easy for me. I know the art director pretty well. We work really easily together. She knows what to expect from my sketches. And I know kind of what to expect from her in terms of what kind of content I'm going to get. And the turnaround is shorter, but usually they already have all of their stuff written. So it's really easy for me to work with. And this piece was about the vaccine and the race for what will be most successful, the fast one or the slower two that are coming from behind. So it was fun to draw animals. I do a lot of work with NPR, and I used to do a lot more work with them. They have a big budget from the Gates Foundation that they work with, and then they also have like an education team. So there's probably 4 art directors I work with there. And this piece was for Life Kit. I don't know if anyone has listened to that podcast that they have, but I find it really helpful. I'm probably being biased, but I find it helpful. Their turnaround is usually like 3 days or less. And all of the art directors there are super easy to work with, and they're used to a really quick turnaround. So I love working with them. The budget is usually $400. If they pay me for an image, they have the rights to it for 7 days, and then I have the rights to it after that. So I can send it to, this hasn't happened, but I could send it to like the New York Times and they could run it. So it's really nice that they just have that 7-day window. And then if they rerun it again, there's a licensing fee on my end of $100, which I think is pretty standard. I have talked to other illustrators, and that's what they pay everyone. So that's really nice to know that, you know, I know how to work with them really quickly and easily, and I can turn that around in a couple hours. This is an older piece I did with NPR. Same deal. This one had 2 days. And they are, because they have the different, we'll call them desks, I guess. Sometimes I get something from the education desk. Sometimes I get something from the health desk, and there's the global health desk. And there's this one art director who I really like, but he always sends me the most depressing, like, article you could think of. And I don't know why, but I get that a lot. So they're still fun to work on. They're just, you know, dark. This is another NPR one that I did a long time ago, but it's one of my favorites because I got to draw a sloth wearing a sweatband. It was a 1-day turnaround, and the headline was something like Americans being lazy, but the word sloth was in it. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to draw a sloth with a headband. There's 12 hours to turn this around. They're not going to say no. It's going to be fun. So I loved doing that. And for this piece, I had a bunch of textures that I had just made, and I scanned in and then drew the little sloth guy. He was fun. I also do some work with Kaiser Health News, and they are wonderful to work with. The art director's name is Lynn, and she is just like a friend. I mean, she's just wonderful. And they usually have a quick turnaround because what they do is they will write a piece, investigate something, work on something, and then they will hire an illustrator and they'll offer it out to other outlets. So this piece was for them, so they paid me, but then they partnered with NBC and it ran on NBC. And sometimes there's a kickback financially, but sometimes there's not. So I think they paid me for this. I didn't make anything extra, but then it was pushed out to at least NBC. New York Times might take their writing, but they never take the art, but the other outlets will sometimes take the art. This was actually one that I did for Kaiser, and then NPR picked up the story. So they paid me an additional fee on top of what I had done for Kaiser. And this piece was about, I think it was about electroshock therapy. Kind of random, but fun to use some neon colors. So I think when Meena was introducing me, she mentioned my blog, which I'm going to be honest, I haven't done in a while, especially with the pandemic and small children at home, I can't manage it. But I did my blog Wordless News for at least 7 years. And this was one of the images I did for Ferguson in 2014 as a response to the riots there. And it's something that I just made with like ink on white paper and scanned it in. It's obviously not detailed, it's not color, it's very different from my other work, but it has been picked up by a lot of different places. And somehow randomly this summer it was used on the Fast Company website for protest artwork, but I just made it for myself. So I didn't have a client, but Windows Magazine, which is part of the Austin Theological Seminary, they reached out to me and asked if they could use it and paid me $600 for it. So if you make something and you like it, you know, you might be able to use it later, even if it's not intended for what it gets picked up for. You guys probably know, but Marius was the first artist in residence at the Richland Library. And I think I did it like a year later. Can't see Marius anymore on my screen, but that was a super fun gig. And before I started officially there, they had some like Heige cards they wanted to send out to their donors and members. And so I created those for them. And that was $800. And it was so fun. And it was so wonderful to like get them in the mail and I don't know, enjoy them. Because I don't get to see a lot of my work in print. So that was really nice. So I'm going to go back to this for a second. The wonderful part of working for the, like doing this for the library was I got to use their brand, and they were such a wonderful client. I got to incorporate their visual identity that that I think is just lovely. And I think all the designers that work there are great. I know one of them was in my class and graduated with me. I think her name's Cheyenne. Anyways, I loved working with them, and they're a good example of a brand that has limitations to work within, which is a little bit different from what I do for the editorial work. The editorial work is an art director coming to me and saying, here's your copy, here's the story, we're coming to you for the idea. We might have some rough ideas, but like we're coming to you for that. And it's really nice to have a client like the library that has a color palette to stay within and like a little logo to incorporate. So that was really fun. So the other thing I wanted to say is, so I freelance probably 40% of the time. And then 60% of the time I am doing, I have a full-time job. So I do illustration, freelance editorial mostly. And then once or twice a year, maybe 3 times, I'll have a big branding job. I don't usually seek them out. They're usually word of mouth, or they're usually just word of mouth. And they are more involved and take longer. And so I usually price them like starting at $3,000. I did one last year that involved some travel, and that was like 12 grand. So they can be really profitable, but they take a long time. I sell prints every now and then. Marius is much more successful at that, like selling artwork, than I am. I have done speaking and workshops, definitely not in 2020 because COVID. And then sometimes I get requests for custom art. But in addition to freelance, which I did for a very long time, just that was my only income. But I did have a consistent client, which was Downtown Church. And they're in Columbia. They were just a retainer client that I had. And last year, they asked me to come on full time. And I said I would if I had a lot of flexibility to continue to do the illustration and branding work because I felt like that would make my work with them so much better. And so they agreed, and they pay all of my health care. They have pension, and they're really flexible. So I think, especially in 2020, freelance is a gamble. You know, some people are fine, and some people have really cut their budgets. And so it's really nice to have that steady income. So the stuff I do for Downtown Church, I do design and illustration. I manage their brand. I do all their communication stuff. And then I get to do special projects that are super meaningful, like when someone has a funeral or a graveside service. I get to design some artwork for the family, and that's been really meaningful. And it's nice to have colleagues. Freelance can be really lonely, so I have enjoyed that. And I want to be really transparent about, you can make it as a freelancer. It just gets harder when you have kids. And I knew that when I had kids, but I didn't really know that until I had kids, and I didn't really know that till 2020. So Meena also asked me to talk about like things I had failed at, and she also was like, "Can you talk about your book?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then I was like, it kind of feels like a failure. So I wanted to be really honest about it. I got this book deal, and it seemed great, and I learned a lot from it, and I enjoyed making a lot of stuff for the book, but I didn't have the control that I wanted over it. I didn't get to pick the title. I didn't get to really have any say in the layout. I really wanted to do like a coffee table book, and they were like, no, it needs to be instructional. And I think I was happy with it being over. And there are things I like about it, but it also wasn't the passive income that I thought it was going to be. So I want to be very transparent about how naive I was at like 26, writing a book and getting a book deal. It's really hard to make money off of a book. You have to sell a lot of copies. And I think that's true for whoever your publisher is, but that was definitely true for this publisher. I dedicated the book to my grandparents, so I feel like that was like a sentimental accomplishment. But it didn't produce any passive income. I got paid, I don't know, I don't remember what my advance was. It wasn't small, but I was never going to earn out of the advance. So that's one fail. And that's a hard thing to admit, you know. I mean, I worked hard on it, but it just doesn't, when I look at it, I don't feel joy. I feel like, why does it have a 17-word title? Anyways, things you can't control. And then the other thing, the little raincoat, I really wanted to find a way to create custom artwork for people. And so I had this idea of like archiving people's stuff so they could throw it away and making it into art, kind of like the Marie Kondo concept, but like taking your kid's 6-month-old rain jacket and like making it into a piece of art and then throwing it away. And it didn't catch on. It was like a thing only I wanted to do. So those are two fails that I wanted to tell you guys about. I have definitely had client work that I was like, meh, I don't love this. I don't love the way it turned out. I wish I could change this. I don't always consider those fails because they pay the bills and the art directors are happy. And I think you just have to let go of some things. It's not the only, those aren't the only two things I failed at, but I think recognizing that sometimes you just have to pay the bills, and it's okay for you to not love everything you do. So for money, I would suggest hiring an accountant. Some of you guys are probably really good at math and really smart. I am not. Like, I have only drawn pictures. That's all I can do. I mean, I don't do numbers. So I have an accountant. I use a billing service, which is FreshBooks. It's kind of like QuickBooks, but like easier because again, I'm not good with numbers. It's good to set licensing fees and put those in your contracts up front. I always make sure I have a contract with a smaller client. If I'm working with Oprah, NPR, Vox, Boston Globe, whatever, they have their own contracts and you have to read them. But they're going to come to you with a contract. You're not going to come to them with one. But if you have a smaller client, like a local magazine or a mom and pop shop that needs a brand, it's really important to have a solid contract. Get ready to enter your tax ID into a bunch of billing systems. I mentioned that earlier. It is a nightmare to remember, okay, this art director, I upload the invoice here and then they pay me with a check and then it takes 90 days and then I got to remind them. And so getting paid is a thing. Not always. I will say like NPR, Oprah or Hearst, they own like all the magazines. Stat News, they're all pretty good about being on time because they have a huge system. But the smaller the client, usually it takes longer to get paid. And don't work for free. I do Create-a-thon once a year with Riggs Partners, and that is the only free work I do. Even if you just charge somebody $50, it's really good to make sure that people value what you do and that you value what you do. So that's the money side of things. And then being a grown-up is like a little bit terrible, especially being home with my kids for like, I don't know, 9.5 months. Like being a kid is awesome. So things I've learned, freelancing, kids are expensive. It's really important to plan for sickness. And I think that even means mentally, right? Like if I have a 1-day turnaround for NPR and I'm sick and can't make the deadline, I have to be mentally prepared to like let go of that job and also not beat myself up and just realize that's life. It's good to plan for maternity leave, paternity leave, like all of the things you don't want to think about, but you should plan for. I know for me, I cannot sit in front of the computer all day without like exercising. I feel like I'm permanently like this, even though I try. So that's just my I feel old now. So I'm just telling you young people to stay healthy. Having healthcare is really important. And I can't stress enough how much of a factor that was in taking a full-time job on top of freelancing. To have a job that pays 100% for 4 people in my family, that's huge. And then take vacations. Like it's good to go to the beach or go to the mountains and leave your computer at home. Take your sketchbook because, I should always be sketching. But like leave your computer at home, get away from it. Don't take freelance jobs while you're on vacation. I've done that before and it ruins the vacation because then you're working. And then that's it. Success is whatever you find to be the best balance of creative joy and stability for me. I think it's important to stay silly and stay curious. And that's my George Costanza pose for all you guys. And now I'm like, wait, maybe you don't even know who that is. Maybe I'm really old.
I'm laughing with you, Maria.
I think that picture best summarizes my personality.
That really
time in 2020. But I really wanted to be transparent about like how much things pay. I think that's a thing I didn't learn in school or in grad school or really even right after. I mean, it's hard to know, and it's like a thing you need to know so you can plan and pay your bills. I don't need Destiny's Child to play right now, but
this might have been the most helpful GD and I monthly meetup we've had so far. We've had some really great ones. This particular one with your transparency has been what I hope that the students hear. I see Gracie clapping.
I hope it makes someone sad.
Well, no, because it's so easy to sort of feel like we might be tarnishing this rad world of creative expression that we get to do daily. But in real life, like, in order to have the privilege of doing this work, there is a lot of planning that has to go into that. And I think you've really hit on a lot of those. And so we have quite a few questions from students. And so I want to ask you, before I start asking them, Maria, that was what I was going to ask you. I was going to say, do you
Hi,
want to stop
I'm
sharing? So I'm going to look at everybody in gallery view. Just that's because that's what I like. But
everyone. Well,
so
I can't really see everyone, but yes.
yeah. So we're still getting some questions in the chat, and I want to encourage you guys to still keep doing that, even though I'm going to start asking Maria some of these questions. So um, you just went through so much, and I'm already, like, I've been doing this work. We've both been out of graduate school for 10 years now, and you say that you feel old, but I am substantially older than you, so I don't want to hear it. So you, Marius, okay. But some of the things that you brought up, like, they're so important. And so I'm sort of like a bottleneck of where to start. There's so many questions that I have for you, but I'm going to start with some student questions because that's why we're really here. So one of the first questions that we got from Mitchell, he asked, while working, do you usually handle one project at a time or multiple? Right. And if multiple, then how would you suggest managing them to stay organized and get them all done on time?
So I always have multiple projects, right? Because I've got a full-time job that has its whole random stuff I've got to do every day, and then freelance. So I don't sleep a lot. That's just being honest. I'm not a good sleeper. I get up at like 4:30 in the morning. But I usually prioritize the things that have the shortest deadline. Or if it's a client I've worked with before and we have a good relationship, I can say, hey, I have 2 other projects at the end of this week. If I'm delayed 12 hours, 16 hours, is that going to mess you guys up? And I try to be really transparent about what my workload is so that I don't let anyone down. I don't know if that's helpful, but I just will do it right as soon as deadline.
Yeah, and communication is what I'm hearing. Yeah. So do you use like a timekeeping app for your hours at all? Or how do you track your hours?
So I bill by project and never bill hourly. And one of the things that I used the Wordless News blog and all of that work for was to become fast. So I don't want to work on a project for more than 8 hours. I'm not making money if it's a $400 job and I've worked on it for 8 hours. It's not worth it. So I try to work really fast. And I just don't bill hourly, so I don't keep track of my time.
So you bring up a good point about time being money. I think about that a lot. And one of the questions that we did have in the chat, and I think it's really important to acknowledge, where we're starting as young professionals, was the difference. Like, basically, what do you mean by hourly when you're talking about not billing projects hourly versus what? What's the difference? What's the alternative?
I should have laid that out for you guys. So if somebody came to me and said, I want you to do, let's say NPR comes to me and they have an illustration project and I say yes, and I say it's going to take me 2 hours. I'm going to have to charge them $200 an hour to make money. I mean, or I could charge them $45 an hour and work all day. So if somebody wants me to track my time and bill hourly, the cost is going to scare them off. If I told someone I'm $200 an hour, I mean, I'm not $200 an hour, But if I, I would start at $100 an hour, $200 an hour would be the max. People won't hire you for that because they think, oh, well, she can't do it in 2 hours. They're thinking like, oh, it would take so long and it'd be so expensive. So there is a way to price hourly work where if it's like hard thinking creative work and it's really valuable, start high, $100 an hour, maybe not right out of school, but like as a professional, it would be around $100. And then if you're doing like just not low level work, but like work that's not super creative, it's already for a brand that exists, like you're just laying out white papers or something, that'd be like $40 an hour. But working hourly bills you for being fast. And if I can do, 3 projects in a week for $100 or 1 project for $45 an hour,
Yeah.
Just, yeah.
So in terms of your process, you use a lot of visual concepts in your work. That's something that, we talked a lot about business tonight, but there is really a whole other side to what it is that you do in terms of your process, your methods that you incorporate into your work. There's a lot of visual concept, like heavy visual concepts in so many of the works that you showed even tonight. Can you talk about your process for conceptualizing visual ideas and, even talk a little bit about your texture library, which you sort of briefly touched on?
Yeah. I think the conceptual side of things, like doing the Wordless news blog for so long, it's just like riding a bike or exercising physically. Like it feels very natural to me to think conceptually first and then think about how the image will be. If I'm really stuck, I'll write down a bunch of adjectives, or I will like go back through my old sketchbooks and like just try to get away from anything that's going to trap me conceptually. And sometimes it depends on the client. So sometimes from NPR, if the turnaround's really quick, all I get is a headline. And so I don't have a lot to go on, but that kind of frees me up to just go wherever my brain goes and then send it to them. And sometimes it doesn't work out. But I think just forcing yourself, if you can, to practice conceptual thinking, even when you don't have to. I mean, it's just like a gym. And the texture library, I just like y'all can't see it because I hid it all over here in the studio. But like, I just make stuff and I make a huge mess and it's a disaster. Meena knows, like we share a studio. I mean, I'm better if I have a giant mess to see and then I clean it up later. But I just make stuff and scan it in and I just have I pay a lot of money for Dropbox. And then I just have stuff to pull from when I'm working.
So that's sort of like a library, an almost never-ending library of colors and textures that you don't have to go and buy. You just throw into like a masked, illustration or what kind of software are you using for a lot of this work?
I do almost everything in Photoshop. Sometimes I'll start in Illustrator, but usually I'm just working in Photoshop. And I don't name my layers. I don't organize my layers. That's in reality too. And if an illustrator tells you that they're naming all their layers, they're lying. It's not. You cannot organize all of your layers and make money. It's not possible. I'm just kidding, but it doesn't work for me. Like if I'm in the groove, if I have to stop and label every layer, it doesn't, I don't know. It stops my groove. So I just don't do it.
I worked pre-press. Sure. My first job out of college was a pre-press designer. And getting your files were the kind of files where I was like, I'm hitting my head on the desk. Who is this person and why did they do this to me?
And the good thing for almost everything I do is like I end up sending a flat file every time.
Okay, so you're in Photoshop, you're flattening it, no layers.
Yes, and that keeps, not that anyone would do this, but that keeps it my work. That keeps it my.
That's true.
It means no one can go in and like change something and then, like I would be upset if they did that.
That's a really good point. So let me, like a really good point, actually, to sort of safeguard your work a little bit about that. And I don't actually have a question prepared for you about safeguarding or protecting rights to your work or anything like that. But I am starting to wonder, you know, you do a lot of social media posting, right? You're a lot of your work is online. And, you know, also the business side of it, you know, there are different types of rights that clients can buy, right? So what kind of rights do your clients get when they hire and pay you? And also, are there ways that you sort of safeguard your work and yourself online?
Um, I'll answer the second part of your question first. I don't really do anything to safeguard my work. I probably have a naive or like too generous mindset. But I just, if somebody wants to use something, they'll email me and I'll be like, sure. You know, it's usually like a teacher who wants to put it in her social studies packet or something. It's usually not a big deal. If it's a publication, they'll ask if I have a fee. Usually the fee is pretty small for me. Like NPR's is $100 to reuse an image. But then, you know, if someone reaches out and says, hey, we have a budget of $1,200, can we have this image for your cover? Sure, you know. Um, I think licensing is hard if it's a big client. They've already got all of their paperwork looked at by a lawyer, and you kind of have to decide, do I sign this and take the job? It's due in 2 days. Do I read over it and like worry about what's going to happen to my artwork? It just depends. I think the smaller clients, like having written a written agreement, like I drew this picture of an octopus for you. You can use it one time. You know, the smaller clients that you kind of have to be more direct with, I think.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But I don't worry about it a whole lot.
Right.
Maybe that's me. I don't know.
No, I think it's a fair question, and it's great that you're being transparent about that. It's just, I think, important to even acknowledge the fact that there are different types of rights that different types of licensing that these clients can purchase from you, and you
Yeah.
know, some of them are already baked into their contracts, as you're saying, and some of them are what you're allowing these clients to obtain and or retain, and for
Mhm.
how long.
Yeah.
Um, another question that we have, and so let me sort of like back up from this. So, um, Jana wanted to know, what are some important components to include in a contract, and Rebecca wanted to know, what are some red flags to look for in a company's contract?
Okay, those are really good questions. So when I have a contract, I try to write out the timeline and the deadlines. Like if the client needs to get me some copy and I don't get it in time, it pushes the project back. I'm not gonna like sacrifice everything because they didn't meet the deadline. I can't do my job if they haven't given me anything. So the outline of the timeline is really important. Um, Talking about usage, I mean, usually there's some agreement in there. This is a one-time thing, or you can keep it forever and use it as many times as you want. I think contracts for like branding work are very different from illustration. Um, so I think I'm happy to send you guys like some examples of my contracts if you want.
That's
Um,
awesome.
I'm just gonna make a note to do that. I don't have a link. I know you were like, send me links. I don't have a link for that, but I will just send you like a simple one. And hopefully that will help answer your question. I feel like I have to look at some of mine to tell you what the exact differences are. It really just depends on the client.
Yeah.
And then what was the second one?
The second one was, are there any red flags to look out for in other clients' contracts that you read?
Um, I haven't, I mean, I haven't had a lot of bad experiences. If a client has an AOL email address, I don't work with them. That's just my personal rule. I think if it's like a 12-page contract, you know, that's, for me, that's a red flag. Like 3 pages of reading is fine, but like if there's that much that they're worried about, then or if it's like really, I mean, like if my mom wanted, I shouldn't say my mom, if somebody's aunt wanted to hire you to like make their bakery logo, but they don't want to sign your contract, or they're like, well, can I pay you $50 to get started? You know, those are red flags, I think. But I haven't had a lot of bad experiences in the contract world.
I sort of shortened some of that and put it in the chat for students so they could just retain a little bit of that, because that was really, really good advice. Additionally, you know, some advice that I actually saw one of our also like people who went to our same grad school but at a different time, Mitch Goldstein. He posted, if you guys don't follow Mitch Goldstein on Twitter, just follow him. He works at RIT, Rochester Institute. And he's got an extremely prolific Twitter and Instagram, but also he's just like really good at what he writes, and he's a great design professor and writer. But I digress. He posted this like just a little bit of like advice to students who are about to graduate, and said, you know, when you're being told what your salary is going to be, just go ahead and ask for 10% more. You have to do that. It will show that you're engaged. It will show that you care about your money and you care about your time. And if they're already willing to pay you, you know, $35,000 a year or $45,000 a year, they're also already ready to pay you 10% more. And it could take you 2 years or more to get to that point. So asking for that at the front end is a really important negotiation tool. What do you think about that advice? And is there anything that you've learned in this position that you're in that has like that resonates with?
I think that definitely makes sense for a salaried position, because a job that's offering you a salary and benefits, they're investing in you long term, and so setting a tone in that relationship in the beginning is really important, because you're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars. I very rarely push back if an art director comes to me with a budget, because I think the budget is pretty unmovable. There's some wiggle room, you know, I think for the smaller clients, but like the bigger print groups like Hearst Magazine, you know, even NPR, like they're paying all the illustrators the same. So if I push back and say, well, I want $50 more, but $400 is their budget, they don't have to go with me, you know? So I think, yes, if you are looking at a salaried position, you should know your worth and ask for more. If it's a really huge illustration job, if it's a book deal, if it's something really big that someone's making a huge investment in anyways, then yes. I think I have over time just gotten a sense of like, okay, Charleston City Paper, they have a budget and it's not movable, because it's based on their ads and, you know, so I think for a salary position, that makes a lot of sense. And I think you can have some pushback in illustration and freelance, but I don't do it that often.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wanted to, we have 2 more questions, but I also wanted to make sure we had some time for your former professors to ask you some questions.
Oh, no. Okay. Whatever.
Stephanie, Marius.
So I had a question. I'm always trying to figure this out. And it's always, you know, talk about feeling old is when you have students that you've had for almost 20 years now, and they get married and they have kids and they're successful, and you're like, oh my God, you just graduated yesterday. How is that possible? But my biggest thing always is, you know, you're freelancing, you're a mom, you're like doing all these wonderful things. How do you stay present in one specific area? I've talked to some former students and some professionals out there, and 9 to 5, like I only answer my email 9 to 5, or I only work 9 to 5, even though our process is not a 9 to 5. We're creative all the time, or we're creative early in the morning or late at night or whatever. So I guess my biggest question is, how do you stay focused in what you're doing at the time, whether that's being your mom part or being the freelance part or being your 9 to 5 job? How do you balance?
Oh, to be real honest, I'm not good at it. My kids are so little that I really have not figured it out. Before the pandemic, they were both in daycare or school full time. So that was easy for me. Like I'd get up at 4:30, I'd work till 7, then I would like get them ready, take them to daycare, work until 4:30 in the afternoon, pick them up, and be done. And now I just work all the time and they're here. So, you know, I think it's important to say no to jobs that aren't meaningful, like especially if you have a salary position. I try not to answer email when I'm with them, but I really haven't figured it out. That's my honest answer. I'm not good at it. I mean, I told Mike last night, I was like, I'm just failing as a parent. Like I'm annoyed, I'm tired, I'm stressed. I really think it's like the pandemic and not everything. But and maybe it gets easier when your kids are older. I don't know, but it is hard with little kids. It's hard.
It doesn't get easier when they're older, because I have a figurative language test to study for after I get off of this, and I'm pretty sure I don't have that test tomorrow, but I have to study for it. And they have sports and they need driven around, and it just changes, you know.
It changes. Yeah.
I'm still trying to figure out the balance. So I'm always asking that question, because I'm like, how is everybody else doing this?
I think the honest answer is,
that's why you have one kid.
well, it's too late. I can't go back to one. You know, you're fine. I think there's some trade-off.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and I knew that when I had kids, but it's not the same. I mean, they have to come first. So, yeah. Reality. This stinks to be grown up.
Well, I don't have a question, but more of a comment that is really intended for the students. And that is that since I've known Maria, she has always been a real hustler in terms of like, I mean, I remember your last semester, you were taking like 18 classes or 18 hours, and you were working 2 jobs.
True.
And you were still getting up at like 5 in the morning to run like 5 miles every day or something crazy like that. Yeah. But what I really appreciate about Maria is the hustle, and also the fact that, you know, she kind of went for it. When you graduated, you were like, I'm going to go to this, you know, #1 grad school. I'm going to move to the big city. When you were in school, you were like, I'm going to go work for Riggs. That's the best company in town to work for. And as I've watched you, when you came back to Columbia and you kind of started working into this illustration career, I mean, I just remember watching you very strategically figuring out every step of what you have to do, you know? And I think that if you're interested in being a freelancer or working in a smaller city like Columbia, Maria's a really great role model for you guys to think about how you have to be professionally minded, how you have to have goals. And I think the fact that like you're one of the few people in town that are working with all these national clients, you know, that's you made that happen. That blog that you were doing every day for 7 years, I mean, that really was I mean, that, wouldn't you say that's kind of what really kicked off or launched your career?
Yeah, for sure. And I don't want to take credit for being strategic. Like I just am not good at a lot of stuff. I mean, that's just I mean, like, I can draw pictures and think conceptually, but I have always felt like since high school, like I didn't have a lot of options because I was just good at one thing. So I don't know if that's strategic or just like desperate, but it worked out.
Yeah, well, but you made it work though.
I made it work.
And I mean, and I can think of how many times I've emailed Maria, where the student is now the master, and I'm like, hey, how do I do this thing, or how do I charge for this, or the questions the students ask me, I'll sometimes ask Maria, like, hey, how are you still an LLC? Are you using an accountant?
Just ask the accountant. Don't ask me.
Always ask the accountant.
Yeah. So, but I mean, I think that I want the students to realize that, Maria has really worked hard, and she's really made and built this career for herself. It was definitely not handed to her in any way. And I think that it's really important for students to understand that, you gotta think about that if you're like, I have to stay in Columbia or I want to go back home to some smaller market. You got to think about what your options are. And
and you have options. I mean, especially this year, like if there's anything that everyone has learned is like you can work from anywhere. I would say 80% of my clients are non-Columbia, so that should be a hopeful. You can live anywhere. Columbia is so affordable to live in, So that's another bonus. Like if you want to do freelance and you're worried about the stability of it, like live somewhere affordable.
Hey, Maria, let me ask you this one. I do have one question for you that maybe students would want to know the answer to. You went pretty much straight from undergrad to graduate school, which is sometimes not. A lot of times people work for a couple of years before they do that.
Yeah.
What was your thinking in doing that? Like, why did you feel the need to do that, and what do you think you got out of doing that?
I think I did that for two reasons. One, I went to the governor's school for arts and humanities for high school, and I loved that experience so much. And I remember right before I graduated, my teacher was like, this experience is like graduate school. And I was like, great, I want to do that again. So I just like, why don't I just go do it? And then I really thought that I wanted to teach. And I liked a lot of things about teaching, but I just was I'm not an introvert, but teaching didn't give me as much time to make stuff. And I realized that made me the happiest. So when I was in grad school, I thought like, I'm going to teach. That's what I want to do. And then after I thought, but I kind of like just being a nerd at my computer, and maybe that's what I'm better at. I don't know. So, and I had a couple of years of experience working at Riggs in school. So I had a little bit of that under my belt. I think it would have been better if I had had more work and then gone to grad school. But I just really was nostalgic for that like environment that I thought it was going to be like from high school. So yeah. And I learned a lot. I mean, grad school is wonderful. If you want to go to grad school, go to grad school. It's good. And I still use a lot of what I learned in grad school, even though I'm not teaching.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think everybody here that has gone to grad school would absolutely say, yes, you should go to grad school. And we have at least one graduate student in the audience right now. And she would probably also say, yes, you should go to grad school.
Yeah.
It's hard, but, and Rebecca is clapping. Yeah. Thank you, Rebecca, who is also a mom. So, this has been extremely helpful. And for me, if I were an undergraduate student, or graduate student, and I'm sitting in this audience, I'm learning a whole lot, feeling like I'm drinking from the fire hose at this point, right? About the business side of things. Is there any bit of advice that you would give as we sort of, taper off of this, interview with you at this point? Is there any advice that you would give to students at this time?
yeah, just keep making stuff like every day, even if you don't want to. But that's the best advice I have, is just to be prolific and make as much as you can, even if you hate it, even if you think it's bad. I've never played a sport. Again, I'm only good at one thing. But I do think that like practicing, exercising yourself like, mentally, and drawing and learning new technology when a new app comes out on the iPad, like just being curious is the best way to find your path. And your path doesn't have to look like anyone else's. I mean, I know when I first started out, I was like, oh, Jessica Hesh, like I want to be that. And there's not one way to be happy. So just make things you like to make and make them every day, and sometimes they'll be terrible, but you'll like find your groove. Yeah, especially while you're like isolated somewhere and have people anyway. Just order all those moleskins and draw. And just stay curious. Like that's, I mean, one of the biggest reasons that I love doing editorial illustration is because I get to learn about stuff that's not design and not illustration for every project. I get to learn about science or education or health or politics or whatever. And that's really fulfilling for me, is not being in that like esoteric world all the time. Like my assignments are not my personal feelings. They're like just learning.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Maria. Thank you for that. And my last screen share for you all is, you know, after all this, we're going to thank Maria properly. But before we all head out, I want to remind everybody what our next semester's monthly meetup virtual visiting speakers lineup is. We have James Victori, Gil Schuler, Kelly Walters from Parsons and New School, and Noah Scalin as well, who are all coming to speak with you across the 4 months of the spring. So at this point, I really want, if you guys could unmute, I want to say a big thank you to Maria.
Thank you guys. Thank you for having me. Thank you. It was so fun.
Thanks.
Good to see some of your faces.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Maria.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.